They were considered invincible. City after city had fallen. Civilizations burned. The Mongol Empire, a storm of death and fire, had never truly been stopped until one fateful day in 1260. How did a seemingly minor Muslim army in the heart of the Levant manage to halt the most feared war machine in history? Who were these warriors that stood their ground while the rest of the world crumbled? This isn't just a story about swords and blood. It's a tale of brilliant strategy, betrayal, leadership under pressure, and a gamble that changed the fate of an entire region. In a narrow valley between the hills of Palestine, two empires collided. One, a relentless force that had conquered from the Pacific to the Caspian. The other, a rising power forged from the ashes of fallen dynasties. The Mongols had shattered the Islamic world. They had reduced Baghdad to rubble and extinguished the Abbasid Caliphate. Their message was simple: surrender or perish. But on that dusty plain near Ain Jalut, something unexpected happened. The Mamluks didn't run. They didn't negotiate. Who they stood, and what followed would echo through centuries. This is the story of the Battle of Ain Jalut, the day the Mongols met their match. To understand the shock of Ain Jalut, you have to understand the terror of the Mongols. In less than 50 years, they had built the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Korea to the gates of Europe. Led by Genghis Khan and later his descendants, the Mongols were not just conquerors, they were psychological weapons. Their reputation arrived before their horses ever did. They'd storm into cities with terrifying precision. If a population resisted, they were annihilated, men, women, and children. Survivors were often spared only to spread the word, resistance is suicide. Their warfare wasn't just brute force, it was calculated, rehearsed. Feigned retreats, ambushes, and synchronized cavalry attacks made them masters of battlefield deception. And their ability to move swiftly across terrain others deemed impassable left enemies in constant dread. In 1258, they committed one of the most devastating acts in Islamic history, the sacking of Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliphate, once the center of learning and civilization, was obliterated. Rivers turned black with ink from destroyed manuscripts and red from blood. No one had seen such destruction. Now, under the command of Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, the Mongols pushed further west, steamrolling through Persia and Syria. Cities like Aleppo and Damascus fell, their leaders submitting or dying. Even Christian crusaders feared them, choosing neutrality over defiance. The Islamic world was crumbling. Egypt was next. And when the Mongols sent a letter demanding surrender, it wasn't a request. It was a death sentence wrapped in silk, an ultimatum that usually ended in fire and ruin. No one had stood against them and lived. But they hadn't met the Mamluks, not yet. The Mamluks weren't born into power, they were bought. Originally enslaved as young boys, they were taken from the Caucasus, Central Asia, and beyond, trained in Egypt to become elite soldiers. Their loyalty wasn't to bloodlines, but to the sword, and from the barracks of Cairo rose a military caste so disciplined, so fierce, they eventually seized the throne themselves. They were trained in horsemanship, archery, endurance, and unwavering obedience. And unlike many rulers of the time, the Mamluks rose through sheer merit and survival. Weakness meant death. What emerged was a warrior class unlike any other. By the time the Mongols turned their gaze toward Egypt, the Mamluk Sultanate was only a few years old. Yet it was already battle-hardened and led by a man of uncommon resolve, Sultan Qutuz. Qutuz had once been sold into slavery himself. Now he ruled Egypt. Sharp, ruthless, and unshaken, he knew what the Mongols had done to Baghdad. He knew surrender meant extinction, and he wasn't alone. Enter Baybars, a brilliant tactician and fearless warrior. Charismatic and cunning, Baybars had escaped Mongol raids as a youth and carried a lifelong hatred for them. Together, Qutuz and Baybars formed an unlikely but formidable alliance, united by necessity and vengeance. While others cowered, they mobilized. Qutuz rallied the fractured Muslim world, called for jihad and prepared for war. He purged internal threats, raised morale, and made one thing clear: the Mongols would not walk into Cairo without a fight. The Mamluks had one advantage: this was their land. They knew the terrain, the weather, the people, and they had one shot to strike before the Mongols regrouped. They were underdogs, outnumbered, outhorsed, and facing history's most terrifying enemy. But they had something the Mongols didn't. They had everything to lose. In early 1260, a shift occurred that no one could have predicted. Hulagu Khan, leading the Mongol advance, suddenly withdrew most of his forces back east. His brother, the great Khan Munka, had died in China, and Hulagu needed to secure his claim in the succession crisis. He left behind a smaller, though still dangerous force under his trusted general Kitbuka. This was the Mamluks' chance, but it wasn't just a matter of marching into battle. Egypt was tense. Internal rivals threatened Qutuz's authority. Political divisions between factions in Cairo made unity fragile. Still, Qutuz acted decisively, executing a prominent opponent to assert control and silence dissent. Then came the final provocation. Mongol envoys arrived in Cairo with an ultimatum: surrender or face annihilation. Qutuz didn't flinch. In a move that stunned his court, he had the envoys executed and their heads mounted on Cairo's gates. There would be no peace, only war. With the die cast, Qutuz led his army out of Egypt and into Palestine. Baybars scouted ahead, gathering intelligence on Mongol movements and terrain. Every step north was a gamble. The enemy still outmatched them in experience, discipline, and fear factor. But the Mamluks had something the Mongols didn't: urgency. Every moment Kitbuka waited risked Hulagu's return, and Qutuz knew it. Timing would decide everything. The final confrontation would take place near the springs of Ain Jalut in the Jezreel Valley, a narrow stretch of land with hills ideal for ambushes. Baybars studied it well. Plans were laid, traps were set. The tension was electric. Two armies were now on a collision course. One, a battle-hardened elite seeking revenge. The other, the most feared force in the known world, unaware that for the first time, they were walking into a trap. September 3rd, 1260. The sun rises over the hills of Galilee. The fields near Ain Jalut are still, but not for long. Baybars takes the lead, commanding the Mamluk vanguard. His mission: provoke the Mongols, make them believe they're winning, lure them in dot, and it works. Kitbuka, confident and aggressive, charges. He sees a retreating enemy and does what Mongols do best: press the attack. The Mamluks fall back, feigning panic, drawing the Mongols into the narrow valley. Behind the hills, hidden in the shadows, the Mamluk main force waits. Archers sit ready, cavalry holds their breath, then it happens. At the perfect moment, the Mamluks spring the trap. War drums thunder, horns blare. Soldiers erupt from behind the ridges, arrows darken the sky. The Mongols are surrounded. Panic ripples through Kitbuka's forces. The Mongol formation begins to fray. They're squeezed from all sides. The valley, once a path to victory, has become a killing ground. But Mongols don't break easily. Kitbuka rallies his warriors. "Fight like the sons of Genghis," he roars. The Mongol cavalry slashes back, desperately trying to escape the encirclement. The battle turns into chaos. Blades clash, arrows whistle, war cries shake the hills. For hours, the valley becomes a furnace of death. Qutuz watches from a distance, eyes fixed on the carnage. Then he sees a break. Mamluk lines waver. Morale begins to slip. And then the unthinkable. Qutuz draws his sword and charges into the heart of the battle. "Wa Islama," he cries. "Oh my Islam." His war cry echoes across the valley. His personal guards follow. The sight of their sultan charging into danger reignites the Mamluk spirit. What followed was fury. Mamluks, driven by desperation and faith, launched a renewed assault. They fought like men possessed. Kitbuka is surrounded, his horse slain. He fights to the last moment, bloody, furious, unyielding. But he's captured, dragged before Qutuz, face bruised, armor shattered. There are no negotiations. Kitbuka is executed without hesitation. His death is symbolic. For the first time in history, a top Mongol general has been defeated and killed on the battlefield. The Mongol army collapses. Survivors scatter, hunted across the plains. Ain Jalut is secure. And then silence. When the dust settles, the unthinkable has happened. The Mongols are defeated. A force that had burned cities, toppled empires, and left continents trembling is now in retreat. Ain Jalut isn't just a victory. It's a message. The Mongols can bleed, they can fall. The myth of their invincibility is broken. From the chaos of dust and blood rose a new power. The Mamluks had done what no one thought possible. They stood their ground, outwitted their enemies, and changed the course of history. The world would never forget the name, Ain Jalut. The Mongols had finally been stopped, but the world wasn't ready for what came next. News of Qutuz's defeat spread like wildfire. To the Islamic world, Ain Jalut was more than a military victory. It was a spiritual triumph. For decades, people had lived under the looming shadow of Mongol terror. Now that shadow had cracks. Egypt erupted in celebration. Qutuz returned a hero. The Mamluks had saved not only Cairo, but perhaps all of Islam from complete destruction. But peace didn't last long. Only weeks after the battle, Qutuz was assassinated, ambushed on the road back to Cairo, likely with the involvement of Baybars. Whether it was ambition or revenge, Baybars seized the throne and became Sultan himself. But he didn't let that victory die. Baybars turned the momentum of Ain Jalut into policy. He fortified the borders, strengthened the army, and led campaigns to push back remaining Mongol threats. Under his rule, the Mamluk Sultanate rose to become a dominant power in the region for over 2 centuries. As for the Mongols, they were never the same. Though still powerful, they never again managed to strike so deeply into the heart of the Middle East. Ain Jalut had proven they could be stopped, and their aura of invincibility was shattered. Their unity splintered. Internal rivalries grew. And with the death of Mongol Khan, their empire began to fracture from within. Strategically, Ain Jalut reshaped the map. The Mongols had hoped to connect their holdings from China to the Mediterranean. That dream ended in the hills of Palestine. Culturally, the battle became legend. Generations of Muslim historians, poets, and scholars would write about the day their civilization pushed back the tide. Ain Jalut became a symbol of resistance, a moment when the impossible became real. It inspired leaders for centuries, a story passed from pulpits to palaces, proof that courage, unity, and strategy could triumph against overwhelming odds. It wasn't just about armies, it was about vision. About standing firm when surrender seemed easier, about belief in something bigger than fear. Ain Jalut became more than a battle, it became a legacy. In a world where fear once ruled, the Battle of Ain Jalut proved one thing: no empire, no matter how mighty, is unstoppable. It wasn't the size of the army that decided the outcome. It was timing, terrain, leadership, and heart. A clash of civilizations, a gamble that could have ended in ruin, instead became a rallying cry for generations. History remembers the conquerors, but it also remembers the ones who said, no more. If you found this story as powerful as we did, hit that like button, subscribe for more epic history, and share it with someone who loves battles that changed the world. This is History Replay This Day.